some kind of essential ambiguity or even irrationality that has long been part of this strategy. And could you guys speak to that and how, what role you think that plays in this? If, you know, Chuck Horner says there's actually, if you apply the filters rigorously, there are no targets.
Right. Well, I mean, you can, there are some things where we started off with the premise that we're going to reduce this to the targets that only nuclear weapons could attack, okay? And we very quickly came to the conclusion that there essentially weren't any targets that only nuclear weapons could attack that we want to attack. One of the targets that nuclear weapons are uniquely suited for is blowing down cities and killing millions of people in moments. That, there's no question that they're best at. The other targets for which they are uniquely suited and don't have a conventional alternative is for counter-force strike to blow up silos of ICBMs protected in silos. But other than that, and even the targets that we look at, you could with conventional attack disable them, perhaps not utterly destroy them, but you could disable them. And so there aren't many targets that are left that are, unless they're quite contrived, like these very targets that are just perfect, that are left. And we agree with that. We want to point out that we're not advocating this as a stopping point. One of the reasons that we stopped here is that we picked this mission of only deterring nuclear force because we thought that this was the only mission you could give to nuclear weapons that reduced the salience of nuclear weapons. It was sort of a self-negating mission of nuclear weapons. And the nuclear forces around the world are now very, very different. And so if we are going to get to zero, we need sort of a rest area where everybody can catch up. And we think that this is it. And so we're not trying to argue that this is a long-term solution, but we believe that this is a necessary step on the way.
Just on that point, you will recall, because you were there during the Reagan years, the endless proposals to modernize weapons. And I as a congressional staffer, I sat through many hearings in which these kinds of questions were asked. Why do we need this system? What's it going to do? And in the end, you got an answer. When you really pressed the representatives, you got an answer. We have to do this for the credibility of the nuclear threat.
Right.
It was a psychological principle. And the question was, given that the whole structure was irrational and would end with global Armageddon, there was, obviously, as you say, a completely psychotic element to it. And the question was that deliberate? A friend of mine, Dan Ellsberg, wrote his PhD thesis on that, 300-page, the political uses of madness. And he concluded that there was, and that indeed this was an element in American strategy, to actually convince your adversary that you would be crazy enough to do something and you acquired this. You acquired the sense of conviction that you attempt to inflict on your adversary by taking a series of what would seem to be rational steps, but they have an extremely irrational outcome. And I think that is the crux, has been the crux of American nuclear strategy, certainly an extended deterrence strategy. Yeah.
I just want to add to some of the things that were said before, that when thinking about where the nuclear mission is necessary, there's a lot of, in this transition phase, there's a lot of automatic thinking. There are a lot of assumptions that automatically kick in. You mentioned some of them already. And one of them, of course, also is this notion that because a country, a proliferator, is trying to develop a nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction, therefore that country has to be a target. That's an assumption we automatically make because it's about deterrence. Oh, okay, so we have to have a mission there. We've seen after the end of the Cold War how the missions have ballooned and sort of automatically taken in regional states, and some have been playing with non-state actors, but that's not been very credible. But there's this assumption that because someone has a nuclear weapon, therefore there has to be a nuclear deterrence function against it. But when we come to these very small scenarios, it's fair to ask the question, well, if our overwhelming conventional capability cannot deter them, why would the nuclear? I mean, there's a logic here that I just don't quite grasp. And I think it's necessary to think about other ways of engaging those problems as well, not automatically kick into this sort of domino effect that because they have nuclear, therefore you have to have them in our plans.
Just to follow up on what Chris and Greg said, I think Dan Ellsberg once told me that he and his fellow Pentagon workers went to see Dr. Strangelove and came out and thought it was a documentary.